Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us for the 4 o'clock show post-election day. And speaking of post-election wrap-ups, I'd like to welcome my next guest, Adam Myers from Providence College. Thank you so much for coming in, Professor.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
I appreciate it as we are breaking down the results, not just here in Rhode Island, but around the country. Was it a 20-hour day for you yesterday?
It really was. Yeah, from the early morning until, well, the beginning of the morning today. Yeah, it was a long, long day.
So let's talk a little bit about the breakdown of the expected blue wave and sort of the small blue wave that we ended up seeing after all. So let's talk a little bit about the circumstances that led to that overall nationally.
Well, I think the circumstance that led to that overall nationally was that essentially, President Trump's approval ratings nationally are, below 50%. A lot of folks are dissatisfied with him, particularly in kind of suburban and metropolitan parts of the country. And so congressional districts in those kinds of areas saw a surge of turnout among folks who wanted to send President Trump a message and wanted to put a check on him in Congress. But in large part because the economy is doing so well, and in large part because the country is so polarized right now, his supporters in other parts of the country turned out in droves to support candidates that he campaigned for, and for that reason, Republicans did a little better than expected in the races for the U.S. Senate.
He definitely made a point today of pointing out those Republicans that did not support him, and especially those ones that ended up losing. Let's talk a little bit about the last couple of weeks and what we saw from the president himself and sort of the tweeting, the messaging, whether pertaining to the caravans making their way through Mexico, comments made about the 14th Amendment. Do you think that played a factor?
It's possible. Certainly, the president decided to focus on mobilizing his base in the last few weeks of the campaign, and there's some evidence to suggest that worked. If you look at the surge of turnout in parts of Florida and parts of Ohio, two states in which Republicans, made surprisingly good showings last night. So I would say the answer is yes. On the other hand, it's possible that some of that rhetoric turned off voters in other areas and in other states and contributed to Democratic victories elsewhere.
Well, we saw overwhelming Democratic victories here in Rhode Island. And one of the interesting ones, especially with Governor Gina Raimondo in her finish, she hadn't been polling above 40, and then we see this 50 number come. Do you think that's attributable to that, again, the numbers that we saw, the turnout, especially in a blue state being of that Rhode Island?
Yeah, I think so. I think she benefited from the national Democratic wave, such as it was. I think that she sort of also benefited from the Fun campaign, kind of losing steam toward the end. Those would be the two factors that I think explain her decisive victory.
And Joe Trillo, barely sort of a blip when all was said and done, despite getting a lot of oxygen during the campaign. Do you think maybe, despite obviously the numbers that Fung pulled in, folks coming to that realization, that message that was hammered home, that a vote for Trillo was a vote for Raimondo?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, his numbers were disappointing, and obviously, it didn't appear that he made much of a substantive difference in terms of the outcome of that race, in the sense that, Raimondo won more than 50% of the vote. So he did not play the role of spoiler.
And how close were you following the speaker's race in District 15 in Cranston? Deja vu from 16, except it didn't go to paper this time.
Right. Well, I was following it quite closely, and once again, Speaker Mattiello, he and his operation in Western Cranston, they really know how to turn out his supporters, because in 2016, he won his race even though Trump won his district handily. This year, he won his race even though Fung won his district handily. And so Speaker Mattiello's voters know how to split their tickets.
Just going to bring you a little bit closer over here. And, one of the interesting points that was brought up during the campaign was a number of groups who had come out in opposition, but very progressive groups,
Right.
Some more so than others. Rhode Island Latino PAC, for instance, took to issue some comments in his literature about illegal aliens, but they're across the board in their political spectrum. Talk a little bit about that. Was it one of the strangest cross-cutting sort of efforts that you've seen as a political scientist?
It's certainly strange. It's in keeping with the very strange nature of Rhode Island politics, where the major conflicts are within the Democratic Party rather than between the Republicans and the Democrats. I think there's reason to believe that some of what Stephen Frias is claiming and some of what the other Republicans are claiming today, that those progressive groups, their efforts in opposition to Speaker Mattiello probably helped him in his district. I think that that's a reasonable proposition.
There has been some talk about that because Speaker Mattiello is fairly conservative, and I think there was some realization if Frias emerged victorious at the potential next speaker, there probably wasn't going to be a more conservative speaker elected amongst the Democrats.
No, I think it's quite likely that had Speaker Mattiello lost, the next speaker would. I mean, there would have been a war that would have broken out between the progressives and the conservatives in the Democratic Party. But my guess is that the outcome of that war would have been a substantially more progressive speaker.
So we'll see what happens. Looking forward to the General Assembly session. But let's talk a little bit now that we know from the midterms. You're a political scientist. Folks were trying to talk about it a little bit before, maybe prematurely, about 2020 and the Democratic ticket. There seems to be a short list of about 20 names.
That's right. That's the way I would put it. Listen, the Democrats now have to decide, essentially, first of all, how far left they want to go, and also how much they want to appeal to the different demographics within their coalition. I mean, does it make sense to, nominate a racial minority candidate? Does it make sense to nominate a woman candidate? A lot of these questions, for better or worse, are important for Democrats to consider, given the fact that social identity is playing such a big role in our politics these days.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit, as we lured you down from Providence College, about your role at the college, and tell us a little bit about some of your expertise and research that you're taking place right now.
Yeah, so I've been at Providence College for a little over 4 years. I teach courses in state politics, political parties, and policy analysis. And I do research on state legislative elections and state politics generally, so I'm very interested in how the polarization that we've seen in Washington, D.C. is kind of filtered down at the state level in almost every state except Rhode Island. Here, we don't have partisan polarization at the state level because there really is for better or worse, no Republican Party to speak of.
And would you say, the Republicans had a very tough election here this year? We talked about that blue wave, occurring in places where folks are prone to vote Democrat. Was it just a result here of the bluest of waves, so to speak, at the very state level?
I think basically the divisions that you see nationally are evident in Rhode Island. It's just that the kind of groups that vote Democratic are so much more heavily represented here. I mean, but if you look at, a map of Rhode Island towns and how they voted in the governor's race, it reflects the national divide. The coastal communities all supported Raimondo. All of the towns in western Rhode Island supported Fung, except for the ones, really far south. I mean, at this point, the few Republicans left in the Rhode Island House of Representatives are pretty much all from those outstate areas, Burrillville, Foster, Gloucester, Coventry, and so forth. And so the same divide exists here as exists elsewhere. It's just, the makeup of the state is such that Democrats dominate. So
what are you going to be keeping on here at the state level in the General Assembly session in 2019?
So I'm going to be interested to see how Speaker Mattiello, assuming he's re-elected Speaker, navigates, the divisions within his caucus. I'm going to be interested to see whether the abortion issue comes up again, whether gun control comes up again. I'm going to be interested to see how the state budget is handled next year. If the legislature is able to wrap up a little bit more quickly than it has in years past.
And finally, while I have you in here, the big news today nationally is, of course, Attorney General Jeff Sessions is out.
Yes.
Not expected, but as Bob Wickham said, didn't expect it so quickly.
Right. I mean, we all knew it was on the horizon, and we all knew the president was waiting until after the election to do it. But the fact that he decided to do it immediately after the election certainly took me by surprise. But listen, the Senate confirms the president's cabinet appointees. The Senate is controlled by Republicans. It's going to be controlled by Republicans even more handsomely after, or at the beginning of the new year. And so my expectation is that whoever President Trump wants, he's going to be able to get.
Who he wants, he's going to get. We're going to keep an eye on all things political down in D.C. and here in Rhode Island. And as we like to do, bring in experts from some of our educational institutions here. So Adam Myers from Providence College, thank you so much for coming into the studio. I appreciate it. And thank you for watching today as we wrapped up election coverage. There'll be more to come for certain. We'll be back in studio tomorrow on Thursday here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center.